Gabriel had always been the boy who had everything. Since he was a child, he had grown up in luxury and comfort, surrounded by fancy cars, mansions, and a multitude of toys that others only dreamed of having. The only son of a billionaire family, his life seemed like a fairy tale, but as he grew older, the reality that unfolded before him revealed itself to be more complex than the perfect images that others saw. He was used to glamorous parties, dinners with influential figures, and vacations in paradisiacal destinations. However, behind all those shiny appearances, Gabriel felt a deep emptiness. Loneliness followed him like a shadow, always present, even when he was surrounded by people. Relationships were superficial. Rarely did anyone seek him out just to see how he was doing, or to share a genuine moment. It was a world where people's worth seemed to be tied to the number of zeros in their bank accounts. At a gala event, as he sipped a cocktail and listened to the conversations around him, Gabriel felt like an outsider in his own life. People were dancing and laughing, but to him the music seemed distant, almost as if he were in a bubble. He was a celebrity among celebrities, but his popularity was based on his heritage, not on who he really was. The opulent surroundings, which were supposed to bring happiness, only heightened his sense of helplessness. That night, an unexpected encounter would change everything. A woman with a warm smile and a gaze that seemed to see beyond her means approached him. "You're Gabriel, right? The heir to the Cortez Corporation." She was charming, and he felt an instant spark of connection, but he soon realized that her presence was only there because of her name. "Yes, it's me," Gabriel replied, trying to maintain a friendly smile, but internally, a weight of frustration was growing. He could no longer stand the same old script. What seemed like a promising conversation would soon turn into a repeat of what he had experienced countless times before. The woman praised her family, talked about her business, and before long, the conversation had faded into a sea of superficiality. After a few minutes, she said goodbye, walking away to find someone more interesting, or perhaps just someone who had more to offer in terms of status. That experience echoed in his mind, leading Gabriel to a state of reflection. What would happen if he were not a Cortez? If he did not have a surname that opened doors but also isolated him? The idea of stripping himself of his identity intrigued him. The possibility of living as an ordinary person, without the weight of his heritage, began to take shape in his mind. And then, in the midst of this inner turmoil, betrayal knocked on his door. A scandal involving his uncle, who had always been his mentor, exploded into the headlines. Gabriel was shocked to discover that his uncle had embezzled millions from the family business and, to make matters worse, tried to frame him. With suspicion hanging over his head and the family's reputation in ruins, Gabriel found himself without ground. The loss of his fortune was swift and brutal, like a hurricane that devastated everything in its path. Stripped of his wealth and position, he decided it was time for a radical change. Without thinking twice, Gabriel abandoned his life of luxury and moved to a small town, far from the glamour and prying eyes. The desire to discover who he really was motivated him, but mainly, the need to escape the pain of betrayal drove him forward. From that moment on, Gabriel would prepare to immerse himself in a new reality, where success would not be measured in numbers, but in human values. Determined to find true love, he would disguise himself as a beggar, ready to face the humiliations and challenges that this new life would bring. His goal was to find someone who would value him for who he was, and not for what he had. Gabriel arrived in the small town on a gray day, the heavy clouds reflecting his state of mind. The streets were quiet, and the silence seemed thunderous after the noisy, hectic life he had known. The first thing he did was to get rid of his expensive clothes, and buy a simple, almost worn-out outfit that would help him blend in with the locals. It was a symbolic act, but also a necessity. He needed to disappear, to lose himself in order to find himself again. The first few days were a real struggle. Gabriel spent his nights in a homeless shelter, a cold and uncomfortable place where the whispers of people battling their own demons echoed off the weathered walls. At breakfast, people were served simple meals, and Gabriel, who had once had the best food in the world at his disposal, now found himself grateful for a piece of bread and a cup of weak coffee. He faced the harsh realities of life on the streets. At every corner was a reminder of what he had lost, not only his wealth, but also his dignity. The scornful looks he received, and the isolation he experienced were constant. Yet there was something liberating about his new life. The lack of responsibility and expectations of success left him free to simply exist. Gabriel began to mingle with the homeless, listening to their stories and learning from their experiences. He met people like John, an older man who had been living on the streets for years. John had a kind smile and wisdom that surprised Gabriel. Despite his circumstances, he always had an encouraging word to offer and a generous heart. "You'll be surprised at how strong you are, young man," John said as he shared stories from his life. "Sometimes life knocks us down, but what matters is how we get back up afterward." Gabriel absorbed every word. He wanted to understand what it meant to be strong, not just physically, but emotionally. Being around those who faced daily struggles taught him to appreciate every little achievement. He learned to share a smile, a piece of food, and most importantly, a little hope. Over time, the hardships became a little more manageable. Gabriel began helping the other residents at the shelter, sharing his knowledge about business and finances. He had become a mentor of sorts to some, and this new role brought unexpected purpose to his life. Instead of feeling like a burden, Gabriel realized that he could be a light in someone's life. Yet even with this new perspective, the weight of his old life still haunted him. Memories of glamorous parties, nights out at fancy restaurants, and empty conversations haunted him. He missed what he once had, but he also found himself struggling with a deep longing to reconnect with someone who truly loved him. It was in this setting that he had his first glimpse of hope. During a food distribution at a local organization, Gabriel spotted Carolina. She was a young woman who was volunteering, her warm and genuine smile lighting up the dark room of the shelter. Her eyes conveyed a compassion he had not seen in a long time, and the way she treated each person with dignity and respect fascinated him. As Carolina moved among the needy, Gabriel felt drawn to her essence. He realized he was falling in love, not with her appearance, but with the purity of her heart. The instant connection and the desire to know her better began to blossom within him, like a small flame that promised to warm him amidst the cold of loneliness. But this new hope also brought a dilemma. Gabriel knew he had to be honest with her about his true identity, but the thought of revealing himself as a lost heir left him paralyzed with fear. What if Carolina rejected him? What if she saw him as just another rich man who had disguised himself as a beggar? As these thoughts consumed him, he realized that he was about to enter a new chapter in his life, one that could give him the chance to experience true love. But the question that lingered in his mind was whether he was ready to face the truth and open himself up to someone who, until now, seemed to be the light at the end of the tunnel. Gabriel's life in the small town began to take shape around new routines and interactions. Mornings were filled with challenges, but also with small triumphs. Waking up in a shelter, often with the early morning chill still in the air, became a common experience, as were the long lines for a meal. He began to appreciate the little things, the smell of fresh coffee, the texture of warm bread, and the feeling of gratitude when receiving a smile from a stranger. Each day, he ventured further into the city streets, observing people, listening to their stories, and absorbing the spirit of the community. Gabriel began to notice details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way children laughed as they played, the elderly couples who sat in the park holding hands, and the dedication of volunteers who offered help to those in need. Each of these moments reinforced his belief that, despite the hardships, there was a human warmth that transcended material possessions. One of his favorite places became a small park on the corner of the street. It was a simple space with old trees and worn benches, where people gathered to talk and relax. On sunny days, Gabriel would sit on one of the benches, watching life pass before his eyes. He noticed that, little by little, the conversations about money and status were replaced by stories of resilience and friendship. The bonds that were forming there were genuine, and he felt part of this new community. But even with all these changes, there was a void that lingered in his heart. Carolina's presence was a constant in his mind. He often saw her volunteering, always with a smile on her face, distributing food and helping those in need. Their interactions were brief, but filled with palpable energy. She always greeted him with a warm look, and the way she cared for others made her even more admirable. One special day, during a food drive, Gabriel volunteered to help Carolina. He sorted through the donations, sorting the boxes, and distributing the items to those in need. As he worked alongside her, he felt her confidence grow. Their conversations flowed naturally, and he discovered that Carolina was not only kind, but also intelligent and funny. Her laughter echoed in the air, and the connection they formed began to feel like more than just friendship. "You really have a way with people, Gabriel," Carolina said as they sorted through the donations. "It's like you can see beyond the surface." "I've learned to value people's stories," he replied, his heart pounding. "Life on the streets has taught me that everyone has something to offer, even if it's hidden." That conversation made Gabriel realize how much he had changed. Before, he had focused only on his fortune and the superficiality of his social circle. Now, the search for true connections motivated him to be a better version of himself. But even as his friendship with Carolina blossomed, the fear of his true identity being revealed continued to haunt him. What would happen if she learned that behind his beggarly appearance lay an heir? He feared that by exposing himself, she might see him as an imposter, a man who used poverty as a mask to win her heart. Gabriel decided he needed to understand his feelings better before he could move forward. So he began exploring the city more, visiting libraries and coffee shops, and attending community events. The desire to become a better person, not only for Carolina, but for himself, became his focus. It was during one of these explorations that he heard about a community project that offered courses and workshops for people in vulnerable situations. He signed up, eager to learn more and give back to the community that had given him so much. As his confidence grew, the idea of telling Carolina the truth began to seem less terrifying. But the truth was still a burden. Gabriel knew that sooner or later he would have to decide whether to reveal himself or continue living under the mask he had chosen. As the weeks passed, the connection between them deepened, and the love he felt for Carolina became undeniable. With his heart torn between the need to be authentic and the fear of rejection, Gabriel knew that the new life he was building in simplicity was intertwining with the possibility of true love. The internal battle drove him forward as he prepared himself for what was to come. Gabriel's life continued to change, and his friendship with Carolina seemed to blossom every day. There was something magical about the way they met at donations, always exchanging knowing looks and shy smiles. But now, Gabriel felt it was time to take it a step further, to invite her to something more personal. One morning, while watching the birds chirping in the park, he decided he wanted to take her to a nearby cafe, a cozy little place that served the best cakes in town. What started out as a simple idea for a date turned into a roller coaster of emotions. He was anxious, nervous, and full of hope. The idea of opening up to Carolina felt both exciting and terrifying at the same time. When the day finally arrived, Gabriel was beaming with anticipation, but also a little anxious. He chose his clothes carefully, wearing a clean t-shirt and a pair of jeans he had found in a donation. Although his appearance was not luxurious, he felt more confident than ever. When he arrived at the cafe, he felt a mixture of nervousness and joy. The aroma of fresh coffee enveloped the room, while the soft afternoon light created a welcoming atmosphere. When Carolina entered, her presence lit up the place. The simple dress she wore seemed to shine under the light, and her eyes, radiant and full of life, left Gabriel speechless. "Hi, Gabriel. Thank you for inviting me," she said, her warm smile making his heart race. "Hi, Carolina. Thank you for coming," he replied, trying to hide the anxiety in his voice. They sat at a table near the window, and soon conversation began to flow naturally. They laughed and shared stories about their childhoods, their hopes and dreams. Gabriel found himself completely at ease, and the barriers that had previously separated him from the life he wanted began to dissolve. He was here, with a woman who saw him as someone more than what he could possibly imagine. However, as the conversation progressed, the reality of what he was still hiding began to weigh on his mind. He wanted to be honest with Carolina, but the idea of opening his heart and revealing his true identity made him apprehensive. He knew he needed to choose his words carefully, but he also wanted to enjoy every moment of their encounter. After a while, as they enjoyed a slice of chocolate cake, Gabriel decided it was time to open up. "Carolina, there's something I need to tell you," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "The truth is, I'm not exactly who you think I am." Her smile faltered for a moment, and he felt his heart race. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, curiosity and concern dancing in her eyes. Gabriel took a deep breath, fighting the avalanche of emotions. "I'm not just a beggar. In fact, I'm Gabriel Cortez. I was raised in a wealthy family, but I lost everything because of a scandal. I decided to live like this to find out who I really am." Silence fell between them, and Gabriel felt vulnerable, as if he were walking on a tightrope. Carolina's expression was hard to read, and he feared that her thoughts about him would change. The reality he feared seemed about to come true. "I didn't know," she finally replied, her voice soft and reflective. "But you're still the same person I knew, no matter your past. What really matters is who you've become." Those words were a balm to Gabriel's soul. He felt immense relief, as if the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. However, the internal struggle was not completely resolved. Even with her acceptance, he still had to deal with his own insecurities. "I don't want you to see this as a facade," he said, his gaze steady on Carolina. "I'm here because of who I am now, not what I was." She smiled, a smile that lit up her face and filled Gabriel with hope. "I see you, Gabriel. I am not blind to your struggles and your courage. You are a strong man, and I am glad we found each other." The conversation continued, and the connection between them grew stronger. What began as an informal encounter turned into something more meaningful, a dance of feelings and promises. When they said goodbye, Gabriel felt he had taken an important step towards what he had always wanted, a genuine love based on truth and understanding. As he walked back to the shelter, Gabriel couldn't help but smile. He was closer than he had ever been to finding not only happiness, but also the essence of who he was. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he was prepared to face them alongside Carolina. The days following his encounter with Carolina were filled with renewed energy. Gabriel felt more alive than ever, and his simple life now had a new purpose. He was eager to see her again and build something real and lasting. Their friendship had blossomed into a delicate romance, with each interaction revealing more about their feelings for each other. However, as the relationship progressed, Gabriel began to face an internal storm. The happiness he felt with Carolina was undeniable, but the insecurity about his true identity persisted. He knew that, despite her acceptance, the truth about his past was still a shadow that followed him. He feared that, at any moment, his past could come to light and ruin everything. One afternoon, as they walked through the park, Gabriel noticed Carolina, engaged in animated conversation with a group of children playing nearby. Her smile was infectious, and he felt grateful to have her in his life. But his insecurity grew when he saw a young man approaching her, a man in an impeccable suit who seemed to belong to the world Gabriel had left behind. "Hi, Carolina. It's great to see you here," the young man exclaimed, completely ignoring Gabriel. Carolina's smile faded for a moment, but soon returned. "Hi, Lucas. I'm just enjoying some time at the park. How are you?" Lucas was a former co-worker of Carolina's, and Gabriel couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy. He wondered if she could possibly be attracted to someone so different from him, someone who belonged to a world of success and stability. Gabriel quickly remembered his current condition, and doubt began to eat away at his confidence. "Is everything okay?" Lucas asked, looking at Gabriel with a suspicious expression. "Are you with her?" Gabriel felt his stomach churn. The insecurity he had tried to ignore was now exploding in his mind. He wasn't a beggar, but he was afraid that everyone would see him that way. The tension in the air was palpable, and Carolina noticed the change in Gabriel's attitude. "Yes, we are together," she stated firmly, looking into Gabriel's eyes. "He is an amazing person." Lucas's gaze changed, and he forced a smile. "Of course, I just wanted to know if you were okay. The world is a tough place, and it's good to have friends. And you know, Carolina, that I'll always be here for you." After this interaction, Gabriel felt more isolated than ever. Although Carolina had defended his presence, he couldn't help but feel inadequate. Comparisons became inevitable. As Lucas talked about his achievements and career opportunities, Gabriel simply listened, feeling increasingly like an outsider. The conversation slowly faded, and when they were finally alone, Gabriel couldn't help but bring up the subject. "You've known Lucas for a long time, haven't you?" he asked, his voice colder than he intended. "Yes, he was my colleague before I started working as a volunteer," Carolina replied, not understanding the reason for the change in Gabriel's tone. "He seems like a nice guy. The kind who can offer you a better life," Gabriel said, trying to hide the bitterness in his words. "I think you deserve that." Carolina frowned, noticing Gabriel's uneasiness. "What do you mean by that?" "I'm not here because of what he can offer. I'm with you because I like who you are." Her words touched the depths of his heart, but insecurity continued to creep into his mind. "I'm not who you think I am, Carolina. I can't give you the life you deserve. All I can offer is a life of uncertainty." She sighed, looking into his eyes sincerely. "Gabriel, I don't care what you have or don't have. What matters is who you are as a person. You have become an important part of my life." Her words were comforting, but Gabriel felt he couldn't move forward with a relationship built on a lie, even an omission. The struggle within him was intensifying, and he knew he had to be honest before his insecurities ruined everything. In the days that followed, Gabriel became somewhat isolated. He felt as if he were in an emotional maze, struggling with the need to open up and the fear of losing Carolina. He spent hours reflecting on his identity, his feelings, and the nature of the love he was developing. What was real? What was superficial? The struggle between past and present seemed to be reaching a boiling point. Meanwhile, Carolina was growing increasingly worried about Gabriel. She noticed a change in his behavior and couldn't understand why. Their connection seemed to be on the brink of collapse, and she was determined to find out what was going on. Finally, one clear night, as they walked beneath the starry sky, Gabriel stopped. "Carolina, we need to talk. I can't go on like this. I need to tell you the truth about who I am." His heart was racing, and anxiety was spreading through his body. He knew that no matter what happened, he could no longer live in the shadow of a lie. The time to open up had come, and he was about to take the riskiest step of his life. The gentle night breeze enveloped Gabriel and Carolina as they walked side by side. The silence was heavy, laden with unspoken meaning, and each step Gabriel took toward revelation seemed to weigh more heavily. He looked up at the starry sky, searching for a spark of courage to open up. The moment he had feared was finally before him, and he could no longer delay it. "Carolina," Gabriel began, his voice shaking, "the truth is that I have been living a lie, and I don't want you to find out any other way. I am Gabriel Cortez. I was raised in a wealthy family, but after a scandal, I lost everything and came to this city trying to find out who I really am. The beggar you knew is just a part of me." The words came out in a rush, and he felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He looked at Carolina, her eyes wide with surprise and confusion. Silence stretched between them, and Gabriel felt his heart sink, fearing that he had ruined everything. "Gabriel, I didn't know," Carolina murmured, still trying to process the revelation. The shock on her face was evident, and insecurity filled Gabriel's chest. What had he done? "I know this changes everything. I didn't mean to deceive you, but I needed to understand life in a different way. The people I knew before were so superficial. I needed time to figure out who I really am, without the distractions of wealth," he continued, his words quick, almost rushed. "But at the same time, I don't want you to see me as an imposter." Carolina's gaze softened, and Gabriel noticed her hands were shaking. "I can't believe you've carried this around for so long. But, Gabriel, you're still the same person I knew. It doesn't change who you are deep down. What if you decide you don't want to be with me anymore after this? I'm not part of your world, Carolina. You deserve someone who can offer you security and stability. I'm not that guy." Tears welled up in Carolina's eyes. "You're so much more than that. What you've been through has shaped you, but it's not all you are. I see your kindness, your courage, and your desire to help others. Those are the things that matter to me." Her vulnerability touched Gabriel deeply. He realized that beneath his own insecurity lay a genuine love and connection that transcended the superficiality of material possessions. He needed to believe that what they had built was real, and not just a facade. "I don't want to lose you, Carolina," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "You've become so important to me. I really want this to work." Carolina smiled, a smile that lit up her face. "And I don't want you to feel less than you are. Life is about choices, and you chose to reinvent yourself. That's something to be admired for, not ashamed of." The conversation that followed was a relief and a new beginning. Gabriel shared more about his past life, the pressure he felt from his family, and how he had come to the point of walking away from it all. He spoke about his insecurities and how life on the streets had taught him valuable lessons about humility and compassion. Carolina, in turn, opened her heart and shared her own struggles, such as the desire to find a purpose that was deeper than work and appearance. As the hours passed, the connection between them deepened. Gabriel felt lighter, as if he had finally freed himself from a weight he had been carrying for a long time. The feeling of freedom that followed the revelation was indescribable. He realized that Carolina's love was not tied to what he had, but to who he was. However, as the conversation progressed, the reality of the outside world began to intrude on their intimate moment. Gabriel knew that while Carolina might accept him, society was often not so understanding. There was also the question of what his revelation would mean for her life, her career, and the future they could have together. "I just want you to know that I'm willing to face whatever comes. I don't want fear to stop me from loving you," Gabriel said, his gaze fixed on her eyes. "And I will be by your side, Gabriel," Carolina replied, with the firmness he so desperately needed to hear. "Together, we can face anything." Her words were like a balm to Gabriel's soul. He smiled, his heart warmed by the acceptance he found. With renewed confidence, he was determined to build a future with Carolina, a future that would not be defined by his old life, but by the authenticity and love they shared. As they walked back, side by side, Gabriel felt like he had crossed a threshold. He was no longer a man running from his identity, but someone who was allowing himself to be seen and loved for who he truly was. He knew the road ahead would not be easy, but he was ready to face the challenges, because now he had someone by his side who believed in him. The revelation and acceptance Gabriel found in Carolina was like a new dawn. Yet he knew that life rarely unfolds so easily. While he enjoyed every moment with her, a part of his mind remained alert, fearing that his past might resurface in unexpected ways. The world he had walked away from was not so far away. He still had friends and acquaintances who might discover his new life, and that possibility made him uneasy. A few days after their heart-to-heart, Gabriel decided he needed to get back on his feet. He began exploring job opportunities that would help him get back on his feet, even if only temporarily. Carolina supported him every step of the way, helping him review resumes and prepare for interviews. Together, they explored the ins and outs of what it meant to start over. One sunny afternoon, as they walked through the city streets, Gabriel felt like he was finally finding his balance. Carolina encouraged him to apply for a position at a nonprofit that worked to help the homeless. The idea of giving back to the world that had taught him so much was appealing, and he decided it was time to take action. With Carolina's help, Gabriel prepared for the interview, and the day arrived. He was nervous, but also excited. As he waited in the waiting room, the surroundings brought him back to the reality of his past. The place was full of well-dressed, confident people, and he couldn't help but compare himself. Insecurity threatened to invade his mind, but he remembered Carolina's unwavering support and what he had learned. When he was finally called, Gabriel took a deep breath and walked into the interview room. The panelists looked at him with interest, but they soon realized that he was not like the other candidates. The sparkle in his eyes and the sincerity in his answers reflected his unique life experience, and he felt like he was making significant progress. However, what was supposed to be a positive experience soon turned into a trap. At the end of the interview, one of the interviewers asked an unexpected question. "Can you tell us a little bit more about your current situation? I've heard rumors about your story and how you got here." Gabriel's heart sank. He hadn't expected his personal story to become the focus of the interview. In a moment of vulnerability, he had decided to be honest, sharing his journey of loss and his search for new meaning. However, after his words, the mood in the room changed. He could see the interviewer's expressions change, the empathy that had initially emerged fading. When the interview ended, Gabriel left feeling like he had failed. He didn't know if he had made the right choice in opening up, and his insecurity began to haunt him again. Rumors about his past followed him like shadows, and the possibility that they would be a barrier to his new life left him anxious. When he met with Carolina later that day, he shared his concerns. "I thought I was doing well, but now I feel like everything I've built could be torn apart because of my past. The one thing I can't escape is my history." Carolina looked at him with empathy, and her understanding gaze made him feel safe. "Gabriel, your story is a part of who you are, but it doesn't define your future. What matters is what you do from here on out. You're striving for something better, and that's admirable." But Gabriel was in a dilemma. He began to question whether it was even possible to start over without the past accompanying him. There were times when the memories of the scandal that had led to his loss of everything became unbearable. He had moved away from his old life, but there were still people who could bring back everything he was trying to forget. That same night, as he watched the stars, a disturbing thought struck him. What if someone from his past found him? What if his old life came flooding back to him in a way he couldn't control? The thought kept him awake, and as time passed, anxiety consumed him. Days later, while walking through the city, Gabriel spotted a familiar figure in the distance. His heart skipped a beat when he recognized an old friend from his previous life, Raphael, who knew him well. Gabriel hesitated, hiding behind a lamppost, but the temptation to face his friend pulled him forward. Raphael had always been someone he trusted, but memories of his days of wealth haunted him. The fear that Raphael would judge and ridicule him was palpable. However, before he could move, Raphael looked around, seemingly searching for something or someone. Gabriel's heart sank. He knew that if he didn't face this situation now, the uncertainty would haunt him forever. And even though the fear of rejection overwhelmed him, he couldn't hide forever. Gabriel took a deep breath and approached Raphael, determined to confront his past head-on. "Raphael," he called, his voice shaking slightly. Raphael turned around, and his eyes widened in surprise. "Gabriel, is that you?" Raphael exclaimed, a mixture of joy and confusion on his face. "What happened to you?" Gabriel felt the weight of the moment. The old life he had left behind was about to come into play, and he needed to find a way to face it without losing what he had built with Carolina. Raphael's voice echoed in Gabriel's mind as time seemed to slow down around him. He didn't know how to react, and his friend's surprised expression only increased his anxiety. Gabriel forced himself to smile, trying to convey some of the confidence he had found by Carolina's side. "Yes, it's me. Long story. How are you?" Raphael hesitated for a moment, his eyes searching Gabriel's face, as if trying to read the secrets he held. "I can't believe you're here. The last I heard from you was, well, it was all very turbulent." "Yes, I know," Gabriel replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I had to step away and reinvent myself." "Reinvent?" Raphael repeated, his expression a mix of concern and skepticism. "Gabriel, you became famous. Everyone was talking about the scandal. That's not something you can easily overcome. What are you doing now?" The question hit him like a blow. Gabriel hesitated, the weight of the truth hanging in the air. He thought about his new life, his search for purpose, and about Carolina, who had become his anchor. "I'm trying to help people. Working with a non-profit that helps those who are struggling." Raphael frowned, clearly intrigued. "That's admirable, but you know people won't just forget who you were. That past could come back to haunt you. Have you thought about that?" Raphael's words reverberated in Gabriel like an echo. He had been so focused on his new identity that, for a moment, he forgot that the past would not disappear easily. The memory of the scandal and the people who surrounded him was still there, ready to resurface. "I can't live in fear of what people will think," Gabriel said, trying to remain calm. "I'm trying to build a new life, and that's what matters right now. I understand, but don't underestimate the impact this can have. You may come across people who want to bring you down, Gabriel. Life is complicated and not everyone will be on your side," Raphael warned, his tone sincere. What had once seemed like a casual conversation began to turn into a deep conversation about their lives, their choices, and the complexities of starting over. The weight of the truth weighed heavily on Gabriel's shoulders, and he realized he couldn't run from it forever. "You're right. It's a constant battle," Gabriel admitted, feeling the conversation take a turn he hadn't expected. "But I can't let that stop me from moving forward." Raphael nodded, and the two men shared a moment of silent understanding. They had both faced their own struggles, albeit in opposite directions. Gabriel was determined not to be defined by his past, and it drove him to become a better version of himself. "I hope you find what you're looking for," Raphael said sincerely. "Just remember that it's important to have people around you who believe in you. And if you need help, I'll be here." Gabriel thanked her, a lump forming in his throat. It was comforting to know that despite his hardships, there were still people willing to offer support. However, the conversation with Raphael had also lit a flame of anxiety inside him. If his past was resurfacing, what would that mean for his new life? With a wave of farewell, Gabriel left Raphael behind, the weight of their conversation weighing on his mind. He remembered Carolina, the strength she had given him, and the love that had bound them together. Determined not to let fear rule his life, Gabriel went in search of her, needing her comfort and support. When he found her, Carolina was sitting in a cafe, reviewing documents. Her smile lit up the room, and Gabriel felt lighter at the sight of her. He sat down across from her, and as soon as their eyes met, he knew he had to share everything. "Carolina," he began, his voice strained, "I met Raphael. He reminded me of everything that happened, of my past. He said people won't forget what happened." Carolina closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing his words. "The past is a ghost we all face at some point, Gabriel. But that doesn't mean you can't shape your future. I know that, but what if people start talking? What if my story gets out and affects you?" He felt uncertainty tightening his chest. "I don't care what others think, as long as we're together. What you're building now is more important than anything that's ever happened," Carolina replied, her voice firm. Her words touched him deeply. Gabriel realized that the love they shared could be the strength he needed to face what lay ahead. Her support encouraged him, and he was grateful to have her by his side. "I don't want to put you at risk. Society can be cruel, and I don't want you to suffer because of my choices," Gabriel expressed, vulnerability on display. "Gabriel, you're not putting anyone at risk. You're allowing yourself to live and love. Don't let fear stop you from being happy," Carolina said, taking his hand. At that moment, Gabriel felt there was something deeply comforting about sharing his fears. He was reminded that vulnerability could be a source of strength, and he resolved that he would face whatever lay ahead head-on, alongside the woman he loved. But the shadow of his past still loomed over him, and he knew he would need to be prepared to deal with whatever consequences might arise. The world was unpredictable, and he was determined to weather whatever storms came his way, because now he had someone to fight for. Life seemed to have found a balance after Gabriel's encounter with Raphael. However, a restlessness lingered in his mind. He knew that peace would not last forever. The past had a way of coming back to haunt him. In his calmer moments, anxiety visited him like a shadow, ever present, ever lurking. Carolina's love was a safe haven, but he wondered if he could protect this refuge from the approaching storms. One day, while Gabriel was working in his new role at the nonprofit, he received a text message that made his heart race. It was from Raphael. "We need to talk. Something is going on and you should." "No." Gabriel's stomach twisted. He was anxious, fearing that the news would not be good. Was this a new wave of rumors? Was there a chance that the scandal of the past was returning with a vengeance? Determined to face the situation head-on, he quickly answered. "When and where?" "Cafe on the corner of 12th Street. At 4 p.m., Raphael replied. Gabriel's heart skipped a beat as he glanced at his watch. It was an hour and a half until their meeting, enough time for his mind to fill with worries. As he walked to the cafe, he relived his darkest memories, the ones that had haunted him for so long. The feeling of humiliation, the loss of status, and most of all, the pain of seeing his life crumble before his eyes. He didn't want Carolina to know the extent of his fear, so he decided he would prepare himself for anything that might happen. The meeting wouldn't just be a conversation, it would be a test of his resilience. When he arrived at the cafe, Gabriel saw Raphael, who was waiting for him with a serious expression. The tension in the air was palpable. He approached the table and before he could sit down, Raphael began to speak. "Gabriel, what I'm about to tell you isn't easy, and I hope you're prepared," Raphael said, his words heavy and loaded with meaning. "The story of your past is coming back to you. There are people who are willing to expose it again." Gabriel felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean by that? Who's doing this?" Raphael hesitated for a moment, as if considering his words. "Some former co-workers, people who were close to you during the scandal. They feel that your story could be an interesting product for the media, and they have already started speculating about you." Gabriel's heart raced. He knew the media attention could be devastating, especially if he exposed his vulnerability again. "And what can I do? There's nothing I can do to stop it." Raphael shook his head. "Indeed, there is. You need to prepare yourself. What people care about most is not just your past, but how you reinvented yourself. If you stand up and tell your own story before others do, you may end up taking control of the situation." "Tell my own story?" Gabriel repeated, confused. "Won't that open new wounds? What will people think of me? And Carolina, how will she deal with this?" Raphael paused, considering Gabriel's concerns. "I understand your fear, but you can't let what other people think control your life. You've become a new person, and that's what really matters. Being transparent can be liberating." Raphael's words echoed in Gabriel's mind. He pondered the possibility of opening up, of exposing his weaknesses and triumphs. Could this actually help control the narrative and perhaps even strengthen his relationship with Carolina? "What if I fail? What if people don't accept my new life?" Gabriel questioned, doubt evident in his voice. "That's the nature of risk, my friend. There will always be people who don't understand, but there will also be those who are inspired by you. The important thing is that you are authentic and prepared for what's coming. You can't live in the shadows forever," Raphael insisted. After a long conversation, Gabriel felt determined to face his fears. He knew the path ahead would be challenging, but if he wanted to live fully and with Carolina, he would need to be honest with the world and with himself. As he said goodbye to Raphael, Gabriel realized that he was about to enter a new chapter in his life, one that would require courage and vulnerability. He began to reflect on how he could articulate his story in a way that would be constructive and not just painful. That night, when Gabriel got home, he shared his thoughts with Carolina. He told her about his conversation with Raphael, and her expression turned serious. "This is a big step, Gabriel. Are you ready for it?" He nodded. "Yes. I can't hide who I am. And if I'm to live fully, I need to be honest, even if it means confronting my past. I'll be by your side no matter what," Carolina stated, wrapping her arms around him. "Together, we can get through this." As they held each other, Gabriel felt a new sense of purpose and determination. The future was still uncertain, but now he had someone by his side who believed in him. The past might be a burden, but it no longer had to be a prison. So Gabriel prepared himself for the journey that awaited him, determined to be the narrator of his own story and not a mere spectator. In the days following his conversation with Raphael, Gabriel felt like he was on an emotional roller coaster. He knew he needed to face his past head-on, but the thought of exposing his vulnerabilities to the world terrified him. The pressure was mounting, and the clock was ticking against him. Word of his story was spreading, and time seemed short. Carolina was a pillar of support during this time. Whenever he felt on the verge of anxiety, she would remind him of how much he had accomplished. "You are not the same anymore, Gabriel. Your story is now about overcoming and not about failure," she would say, trying to encourage him to look to the future. Finally, the day came when Gabriel decided to go public. He had scheduled a press conference with the communications team at the organization where he worked. He didn't want the story to be manipulated by tabloids. He wanted to take control. As he prepared for the event, Gabriel revised his speech several times. The words were heavy and loaded with meaning. He wanted his story to be a message of hope and resilience. But at the same time, insecurity plagued him. What if people don't accept him? What if history turns against me, he thought. When he arrived at the press conference, he could feel the tension in the air. The auditorium was full of journalists, each with their own questions and interests. Gabriel took a deep breath, trying to find a calm center amidst the hustle and bustle. He stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding, and looked out at the audience. All around him, curious faces watched him, some expectantly, some skeptically. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm here to share my story, not because I want to rehash my past, but because I believe it's important for you to understand who I am now and what I stand for." He paused, taking in the audience's reaction. There were murmurs and quizzical looks, but he decided to continue. "I'm Gabriel, and I was a public figure known for a scandal that ruined my life. But more than that, I'm someone who learned from my mistakes and decided to reinvent myself." The words began to flow more naturally as he felt more confident. He shared details of his downfall, but also focused on the lessons he had learned. "After the scandal, I lost everything, my job, my reputation, and most importantly, my identity. But that loss forced me to look inward and discover who I really am. I started working with a nonprofit, where I was able to help people who were going through similar struggles," he explained. As he spoke, he saw faces in the audience change. Some journalists were taking notes fervently, while others looked puzzled. He was beginning to see that by opening his heart, he was earning the respect of some. "If I could convey one message today, it would be this: we all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after them. Facing the past is scary, but it is a necessary step toward a better future," he said, feeling the passion in his words. The press conference continued, and questions began to pour in. The journalists wanted to know more about his life, how the transformation had impacted his worldview, and of course about Carolina. Gabriel spoke candidly, revealing how she had helped him on his journey. He felt that each answer brought him closer to a place of peace with himself. When the press conference ended, Gabriel felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Relief washed over him, mixed with a sense of accomplishment. He had faced his fears and spoken the truth, and that was liberating. After the event, Carolina was waiting for him outside with a radiant smile. Seeing her, Gabriel felt his heart warm. He ran to her and hugged her tightly. "I did it. I really did it," he said, emotion brimming in his voice. "I knew you could do it." "You were amazing," Carolina replied, her eyes shining with pride. "You performed with such honesty. People will feel that." Gabriel smiled, though the nervousness was still there. "I hope so. Now, I just hope things calm down, and I can start rebuilding my life without the weight of the past." "You're not alone in this, Gabriel. I'll be with you every step of the way," Carolina assured, holding his hand. As they walked together, Gabriel felt lighter. He had taken the first step toward regaining control of his life. It was a new beginning, and with Carolina by his side, he knew he was ready to face whatever challenge awaited him. However, he couldn't ignore what Raphael had said. There were people who might try to bring him down again. But now, he had a new perspective. If something came up, he would stand his ground and fight to protect not only himself, but also those he loved. So Gabriel's journey was just beginning, and he was prepared for the challenges and rewards that would come his way.